moment you board a plane and the wheels have lifted, when you land in whatever country you're going into, the laws that apply are not Kenyan laws. They are the laws of that respective country. So please respect the law. It is unfortunate that a Kenyan is facing this kind of situation. It's not a pleasant situation, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and in particular my PS, has been trying to converse with his counterpart in Vietnam to see if there can be some mitigation in this process. So that is one thing, and we hope that there can be some success.
So the case of Margaret Nduta is still evolving. If you are not familiar with the case, just go to my playlist and watch the full video on who she is and the situation she's in. But just to give you a gist, she's actually a Kenyan lady set to be executed in Vietnam on charges of drug trafficking. And the details are very, very interesting. Now, she was due for execution just last week, and the Kenyan government intervened. They made a plea to the Vietnamese government through their political relations, and reports coming in indicate that fortunately Margaret Nduta has survived execution. So there has been a stay of that execution. But then it doesn't mean she's free. It actually turns out per reports out there that it's been alleged that the execution has not been totally taken off board. It has just been postponed till June 2025. Now, this means that it's likely it has just been pushed back just so further conversations can happen. Some people out there are interpreting it that it means that the death penalty or the execution sentence has been quashed or called off. Per what I'm gathering, it doesn't seem like that is the case. I may be wrong, but per what I'm gathering, it seems more like the Vietnamese judicial system and government have just delayed the execution pending further engagements with the Kenyan authorities. And it would make sense because I said this in my earlier video that Vietnam has very strict laws on drug trafficking, and it's something they don't joke with. If you mess with the DRUG and you are caught, the Vietnamese law is very strict and straightforward if you are found guilty. And in this case, Margaret Nduta has been found guilty. So if the Kenyan government is trying to intervene, I respect that. But then if you look at it from the perspective of the Vietnamese government and the law of Vietnam and the fact that it needs to be respected, you shouldn't expect that it's likely Margaret Nduta would be taken off the hook just because her government is pleading. Because bear in mind, this law wasn't introduced in 2025. It's been there and has been applied to several people who have been found guilty of the same offense. They also came from some countries and they had governments, and I'm sure at a point in time their governments might have tried to intervene. And the point is, if Margaret Nduta is spared, where do Vietnam draw the line in terms of their application of the law? I'm not saying she shouldn't be considered or anything. I'm just making an objective analysis where it's likely the Vietnamese government and judicial system, for that matter, would be factoring all this into their analysis in considering whatever plea or appeals that the Kenyan government is allegedly putting out to the Vietnamese government. Because in as much as they are trying to foster good political relations, it's also very important to understand that the rule of law cannot also sway to relationship and kowtow or kowtow, as some people pay it, to whatever pressures may come from external sources. In that, it's very curious to see how this will play out, because where then would the case play out after June? Will Margaret Nduta still be subjected to the execution, or is it that she's going to be spared? Is it that she's going to be repatriated back to Kenya and punished there? Is it that her sentence is going to be reduced by the severity and maybe she may rather serve a life sentence, in which case it will set a precedent for any other conviction that will be in line with drug trafficking, where it's likely you will then see the governments of other countries coming forward trying to make a plea and referencing what was done for Margaret Nduta. So I think that all these things, if it turns out that the Vietnamese government are looking at that, it begins to work against Margaret Nduta, because maybe they may be willing to sort of be a bit soft or lenient based on whatever Kenya is putting out. But then they would have to consider this aspect, because if they relax on the law or if they dim it down a bit, it could also be interpreted as open season by other criminal enterprises who may have been warned off or scared off by the law that it is right now. So if they realize that, we can even venture and our government can come in and intervene when we are found guilty after being caught, then it could become open season on Vietnam. Personally, I think that this case is on the borderline of when the law meets emotions. If you listen to the story of Margaret Nduta, it's a very emotional one. She had a life, she has kids, she has a family, and per what she's saying, she's innocent, and she was actually tricked into carrying this suitcase which had the drugs in them. As to whether that is what actually happened, as somebody will say, you and I were not there. So we rather look at what the evidence says, and the evidence is saying that she was in custody of these drugs. But then, having done this for some time, I also know that sometimes some people are actually fooled and tricked into being mules without their knowing, especially when they trust blindly. And it looks like it's a possibility this is what maybe Margaret Nduta has been caught in. But for now, the execution has been stayed. She has survived for a few more months, and there is a section of the Kenyan population who are expecting that come June 2025, Margaret Nduta would have actually been taken back to Kenya, where she may actually go and serve a sentence that the Vietnamese government may agree on with the Kenyan government. I don't think that is likely, but hey, never say never. But kudos to the Kenyan government. I think they've stood for their people. That is not to say they are condoning whatever she may actually be guilty of, but that is just to show that they are also reaching out and making sure that they intervene or intercede for their people who may actually still have been guilty, but they are pleading for leniency. I think it's commendable. And one of the Kenyan government officials by name Mudavadi actually has gone on to talk about the fact that there are over 1,000 Kenyans in jails abroad, and that they are trying to also seek clemency and look for other ways of reaching out to their citizens who are facing various situations in jails out there. It is very unfortunate, and most of these about 1,000 Kenyans in prisons abroad are actually there as victims of drug traffickers. Now the question is, why is it so rampant, and why Kenyans? Because there is another story of a lady, and I'll be doing an episode on her after this one, because it seems that her situation is very similar to that of Margaret Nduta. Her name is Pesh Lema, and she allegedly has actually even commented on Margaret Nduta's situation, talking about the fact that they have spent time in jail before. Pesh Lema was also imprisoned in Ghana, West Africa, on charges of drug trafficking after being found guilty. And she's saying that she did some time with Margaret Nduta. I'm going to get into that when I'm covering the case of Pesh Lema, and you wouldn't want to miss that, because It's alleged that she's saying that, let me put it that way. But if it turns out that what Pesh Lema is true, I think that it could blow this case of Margaret Nduta in a different direction altogether. And I'm going to get into that on the next episode, where we are going to look at the case of Pesh Lema side by side with what happened with Margaret Nduta, and you see how similar it is. And so, when it's alleged that Pesh Lema comes to see what she's alleged to have said, I think that the authorities may be looking into that. I don't know. But if it turns out that's the case, well, then there are interesting days ahead for this case on Margaret Nduta. But as it stands now, I'm grateful that you followed this video all this while, and I commend the Kenyan government for what they've done. Margaret Nduta is still breathing, and we wait to see how this would play out. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so yet. What do you have to say to Margaret Nduta? Let me know in the comment section. What do you have to say about what the Kenyan government has done? What do you even want to say about this whole case in itself? Let's have a dialogue in the comment section. If you know of any such similar cases also, you can let me know. I'll look into them and I'll make an episode on them. I think that it's important we share such videos with our loved ones so they learn and be alert, so they don't fall victim to some of these predators out there who may prey on unsuspecting and completely trusting people and make them mules without their knowing or consent. I'll catch you on the next one. Stay safe out there.